October 2011, a woman's body is discovered in her home in Tooele City.
It was overkill. 14 times to a 69-year-old lady.
The victim is a much-loved grandmother, and her brutal murder rocks the small Utah community.
I think people were a little nervous and a little scared.
People wanted to go to bed at night safe, and you'd had a violent murder, and people just didn't feel safe.
A large-scale investigation is launched, and forensic evidence uncovers a number of leads.
Early on, we were just taking DNA samples from anybody that would consent to one.
You know, it makes you scratch your head that a person who was capable of committing such a heinous act wasn't in the system yet.
I believe it was very frustrating for our entire department.
As years pass, there is fear the case will never be solved. But determined detectives keep testing new methods to progress the case.
Anytime someone would call, they would follow that lead, but those leads were becoming fewer and fewer and fewer.
All we had was an unknown male's DNA.
This is the story of the exhaustive investigation into Evelyn Derricott's senseless murder and how her killer became another successful target of the Bloodline Detectives.
There was someone in the system that had a familial DNA match to our suspect.
Without that familial DNA, I, as the prosecutor, do not believe this case would have been solved.
On October the 7th, 2011, the Tooele City Police Department in Utah receives an emergency call.
I'm coming to check on a lady, and I don't know if she's dead. I need help fast.
There was a distraught lady.
Please help me. Tell me if she's breathing. I can't even open the door. She's collapsed on this. I've been trying to call her. I've been trying to get in her house, and I can't open the door. She's on the bottom of the stairs. Okay, can you tell if she's breathing? I can't tell. I can't get the door all the way open.
When she opened the front door, she was able to see Ms. Derricott's body. It was kind of blocking the front door so it wouldn't open all the way, and on the stairs.
Is this a family member of yours, Terry? No, you don't have family here. I just take care. I just help her when I can. Okay. I just check on her every day. You check on her every day, and you've been trying to reach her for 3 days. Okay.
Patrol officers soon arrive at the two-story residential home.
It's a little bit older of a neighborhood. House is probably built in the 70s. Most of the homes are a split entry home, so you walk into a landing and you can either go downstairs or upstairs. She was basically at the base of that landing, where you'd either go upstairs or downstairs when you entered the home. She was kind of in the fetal position at the base of the stairs.
They observed some blood and some signs that made them believe that this may have been something of a suspicious nature. And they backed out and got a hold of the investigations division.
The scene is cordoned off, and detectives and crime scene investigators begin a walkthrough.
We started looking for any type of evidence that could answer as to why this woman was deceased at the bottom of her stairs.
We didn't know if maybe she fell down the stairs, hit her head. Obviously, we thought things looked suspicious. The house was a mess. It was hard to pick out evidence. There was clutter throughout the house, stacks of boxes and clothing and just miscellaneous items throughout the entire house. There was some blood on her body and kind of on the stairway. It wasn't the amount of blood you'd expect. You wouldn't see in the movies where there's blood spatter on the walls or anything like that. There was very little blood on the scene.
They began to take pictures. They began to look if things were disturbed, if things obviously were missing. Things out of the ordinary moved from dust. You know, there might have been something sitting there and the dust around it would show that it had been moved, because they didn't know exactly what they were looking for.
With forensics starting a sweep of the house, detectives contact the victim's family.
I was at my husband's work. And the phone rang at his office, and he answered it. And I could tell something was off, and I just sat there and was looking at him, and I whispered, "It's about my mom, isn't it?" And he just shook his head, "Yes." And I said, "She's dead, isn't she?" And he just shook his head, "Yes." I remember I didn't even cry at the time, but then when I went home to get ready, I just felt lost. I didn't even know where to start, to how to pack a bag, to go to Twila, to talk to the police or anything. I just was numb. Actually, I called my husband and told him what happened when school got out and headed home to get him. We met my sister and her husband in Twila. Well, when we got to Twila, we were supposed to go to the police station. So we did, and then they said that we couldn't go to the house.
A member of the medical examiner's team had arrived at the house and was undertaking an examination of the body before moving it for autopsy.
Her body was handled in a manner that was respectful to her, but also preserved the evidence, what evidence there might be, in order to move forward with the prosecution. Her hands, her feet were bagged. They took great care to not really move her in order to not lose any evidence that might be on her body.
And then the body was removed and sent to the medical examiner's office.
Despite all the clutter, forensics gather some crucial evidence in their initial sweep of the home.
There wasn't a lot of blood on the scene, but her hoodie was soaked in blood.
They located a hammer, a ball-peen hammer, at the top of the stairs, and one of the officers noticed that it appeared to have blood on it. So that obviously was photographed and immediately taken into custody, bagged correctly so that it would preserve that evidence.
And they found that her vehicle and her cell phone were missing.
We asked them if there was anything that we could help them do, because they had to go back into the house and dust for fingerprints and collect evidence, and they had told us that we could try and go to the phone carrier and try and find out what we could about her phone, her cell phone.
Initially, I thought that maybe somebody had tried to break in. You know, Miss Derricott had walked up on whoever was breaking the house, whether she came home and they were in the house. And that's what startled the intruder, and then that's when she was killed.
At the time, they believed that this person had entered through the back sliding door in the kitchen.
It was unlocked, so we believe that's how he came into the house.
With the knowledge the killer was likely an intruder, detectives need to work out quickly if Evelyn was a targeted victim.
He didn't want to be caught, and he grabbed the hammer that we believe was laying at the top of the stairs, and he put an end to her being able to recognize him.
I always wondered if she just surprised somebody and they panicked.
In October 2011, police in Tooele, Utah, are investigating the particularly gruesome murder of grandmother Evelyn Derricott.
My dad passed away in '97, so she'd been a widow for quite a while.
So who was Evelyn? And could she have crossed paths with her killer?
She loved to crochet. She loved her cats. Growing up, we raised Persian cats, and so she absolutely loved Persian cats.
She was a caring person. She did, she did care for people. She wasn't somebody who would just hide, She did interact with people. She liked to help people. She liked to be able to do things for other people. And they always remembered who she was. There was one boy that lived, he's not a boy anymore, he's older than I am, but he lived around the corner. He called her Mom for years.
She was a woman that kept to herself, stayed in her home much of the time.
She had very few friends, but the friends she had were close to her. Never any complaints, never any police calls, never any issues with the neighbors. The neighbors all seemed to like her. She was quiet. She just was a very sweet, typical elderly lady.
Her daughters had already been married, lived outside of the area.
I was very close to my mom. She was my best friend.
As investigators are interviewing family, the autopsy is carried out.
Two of our officers attended the autopsy. The results were that she died from blunt force trauma.
So they shaved her head, where we were able to see the number and the kind of severity of the injuries. They cut back the scalp to check the skull. We were able to see multiple skull fractures.
She had a jacket on that had a hood, and the hood had been pulled over her head because there was holes in the hood that would coincide with the spots on her head.
It was soaked. That's why there wasn't much blood on the scene, is because all the blood had actually ended up soaking into the sweatshirt.
I don't believe she fought back, because I believe, and I think the police believe, she was surprised, she was caught off guard, and probably the first hit would have rendered her unconscious.
The only thing you could think of is the possibilities where someone is either very vicious or someone who was scared to death and just was out of control, because it was completely, I guess the best way to say it was overkill. I mean, 14 times to a 69-year-old lady.
These were horrible wounds. They were delivered with such force that her skull was cracked open. Not just like where the hammer hit, but the skull was cracked open from the base of the skull towards the top. It was violent, it was vicious.
Given Evelyn's age and the fact the attack happened within her home, there is deep shock and concern within the community.
It's a pretty quiet, small town, 35,000 people.
It's a working class community, mostly. A bedroom community. We have a large amount of our population drives into Salt Lake for work.
I think it's a safe place. It's a nice place to raise your children. It's quiet. It's peaceful. There are not a lot of murders. Prior to right now, in the 22 years I've been a prosecutor there, I think I've handled 5 or 6.
To have somebody killed, especially somebody that was at home, minding their own business, just an elderly lady home alone, I think people were a little nervous and a little scared.
The community wanted this solved. People wanted to go to bed at night safe, and you'd had a violent murder and people just didn't feel safe.
Under pressure to catch the killer quickly, detectives start canvassing the area and searching for Evelyn's stolen car.
Investigators initially canvassed the area, the neighborhood where 410 Havasu is. They spoke with as many people as they could. They checked for local video surveillance.
The police could not find Ms. Dericott's cell phone. They tried calling it. There was no response. It was not located in the home. It was not located in the garage. So they obtained a warrant and they began to get triangulations on the cell phone to tell them where the cell phone was at. The cell phone was pinged to an area in the western Salt Lake Valley. So they began to canvass the area. They were calling the phone randomly. And they were being very judicious about that because we figured the phone was sitting out in the open, in the elements. It had been a few days, so you didn't want to lose the battery, so they weren't just calling it and calling it and calling it because they were fearful that the phone might die and they might not find it.
Fortunately, the phone battery was a pretty robust battery, so every so often we'd make a phone call to the phone number to see if we could hear it ringing, and ultimately that's how we found it. Somebody had thrown it in some bushes and left it there.
It was submitted into evidence and nothing of any type of evidentiary value was found on the phone.
With the phone a dead end, police make another important discovery.
When we got the area where the cell phone was last located, ultimately that's how we found the car.
Her car was parked next to a home in the area. It was parked on a street to the side of the home where there's a fence, so the homeowner wouldn't have been concerned. It wasn't parked in front of somebody's home.
There were some shoe prints on the scene that were of small size shoe. We found some matching shoe prints on the hood of the car. The seat was slid really close to the steering wheel, which kind of matched our theory because the small size of the shoes, we believed it was a juvenile, somebody maybe 13 or 14 years old.
The officers take the car into evidence and process it and so forth, and they take the steering wheel off the car and send it into the crime lab to see if they can get any DNA matches off the steering wheel.
There was a male DNA that was found on the hammer, and there was male DNA that was found on the steering wheel. So we had a male profile.
As detectives start checking juvenile records, the forensics report arrives with the results from the hammer.
The hammer head, the blood, was a single source and typed and matched the victim. The hammer handle was a mixture of two individuals.
They had DNA from Evelyn, and then the only other they could pull out was a male.
The profile was entered into CODIS, and typically this unfortunately happens sometimes where it just stops. You know, there's no match, there's no association. Then the next step is to wait to see if somebody is sampled in the state of Utah or another crime matches that crime scene sample, or out of state, maybe somebody gets arrested as an offender and they're uploaded into the CODIS system. CODIS is a database administered by the FBI. It's a national DNA database system that takes crime scene profiles and takes known profiles from offenders and puts them into one repository that states can search against.
It's curious, you know, it makes you scratch your head that a person who was capable of committing such a heinous act wasn't in the system yet, hadn't committed or had been caught for any other crime. So it had me scratching my head a little bit.
With no leads from the database, officers start a mass swab campaign.
They began to put together a list of individuals who may have committed crimes in the past, such as burglaries or violent crimes. Individuals who had recently been released from prison who may have committed crimes similar to this, not so much the murder, but burglaries or breaking and enterings, those type of things. They took those samples from those individuals, immediately sent them to the crime lab. The crime lab immediately processed those because we're dealing again with a heinous murder.
Early on, we were just taking DNA samples from anybody that would consent to one that wasn't already in CODIS, the DNA database. And we were just taking samples from as many people as we could, and hopefully we got a hit, or we were unfortunately hoping that maybe this person would commit another crime that would require his DNA to be taken as far as being put into prison or something like that.
They were really very much shooting in the dark because they really didn't have really any leads. And as they kept talking to individuals, nobody seemed to know really what happened. So they would hope they'd talk to one person who had maybe heard something from somebody else and start giving them some leads as to where to take the case. But they just kept hitting dead ends.
Disappointment for investigators, the killer is still evading detection. But a new, groundbreaking method will soon break the case wide open.
We have finally got a pool of people to look at. I mean, it's like we've narrowed down this massive suspect pool to a small pool, and you're like, well, if they've got somebody, then we got something we can do now. I mean, we have somewhere to search.
By 2014, the Tooele Police Department in Utah had exhausted all leads in its attempts to solve the murder of 69-year-old loving grandmother Evelyn Derricott, who was beaten to death with a hammer in 2011.
She was coming up a little set of stairs, and he was at the top of the stairs, and she had a jacket with a hood on, and he pulled the hood over her head and started hitting her with a hammer.
This wasn't just, one blow to the head and run. This was repeated, 14 times. It was quite vicious.
Looking for a new approach, investigators learn of an advanced crime-solving technique, familial DNA searching.
It was just a bit of luck, I guess. I was at a training where some of the analysts that work at the crime lab were there, and I happened to be familiar with one of them, went to college with one of them. Him and his colleagues were talking and thought that this case might be one that they would be able to use this new forensic familial DNA for.
It was kind of one of those things where you're like, well, maybe that'll work. And so we contacted the state crime lab and asked about it to get more information on it and whether it would be possible for them to do a familial DNA search.
The way DNA works is you get a crime scene sample and you get a comparison sample, and they match. The difference with familial test is that you take the crime scene sample, and now you're saying we don't have a sample. Doesn't match the victim, doesn't match the consent partner, so it's just this unknown sample. Is there more information there that we can get? And the question is potentially. If you take that sample and search it against a known database of samples, for me it was sort of the next step in the evolution of DNA testing, to be able to provide not just a resolution to the case, but if the case hadn't been resolved, to be able to provide some forensic intelligence to the investigators.
Familial DNA had not been used in Utah up to this point. The crime lab was very concerned about the legalities of it. They were very concerned about Fourth Amendment searches and conducting this random search into a database. They were very concerned about the privacy rights of the person it would have matched familial to. We sat down in the crime lab with the crime lab individuals, the police department, myself, and work through how this would happen and the steps we would take to ensure that this DNA could be used in the future and that we weren't going to create bad law, so to speak.
With the legalities resolved, a familial search was run on the database and immediately came up with a hit.
There was someone in the system that had a familial DNA match to our suspect.
They provided us with a name of a relative to our suspect.
That's kind of the idea of the familial test, is to kind of just jumpstart the investigation, to get them to find another potential lead for us to take DNA samples from and potentially link up.
They told us the name we're about to give you is within 1 or 2 generations from the person you were looking for.
We have finally got a pool of people to look at them. It's like we've narrowed down this massive suspect pool to a small pool, and you're like, well, if they've got somebody, then we have something we can do now. I mean, we have somewhere to search, to have some direction, and that was just really exciting.
Officers now need to build out the family tree to identify their suspect.
It hit to a very close family member, and then further down the list to another close family member, and then a little further down another. So now they've got the last name.
They needed to take this individual and they needed to create a family tree. And that family tree had to be complete. It was either going to be a brother, it was going to be a father, it was going to be a grandfather, it was going to be an uncle, or possibly a cousin, but that's as far out as they really needed to look from this individual. So it took some time. It took a lot of investigation in order to put this family tree together.
And they just started building the case so they could substantiate who it is that they would need to get DNA from.
So they had narrowed it down, and they narrowed it down to an individual who they had researched, who they had investigated, looked on social media. This person was smaller. This person fit the physical profile as far as the shoe prints, as far as the things they were looking for. This person fit that. They didn't have a DNA sample, so now they got to go after that.
With the suspect identified, investigators now need clearance from the DA to retrieve further confirmation that he is the killer.
We didn't have at that moment probable cause to get a warrant to just go take his DNA. We decided, and they decided, it would be best to try and get a profile off of something he would have left behind, something he had used, had touched, where the right to privacy, the expectation of privacy no longer existed.
The process is grab some discarded DNA from your suspect and bring that DNA sample to us. We'll do the test. If it matches, then we'll take those DNA samples and you can write a search warrant and get a blood sample or a saliva sample from your suspect, and we'll test it and match it up against the crime scene sample.
We needed to actually develop probable cause to get a warrant from real, regular police work.
We set up some traffic stops to try to get, citation signs, see if we get a DNA off of pens.
We surveilled his home or places he was staying for many weeks.
He was a tattoo artist, so we would talk to him about getting tattoos or what kind of work he does.
Some of the detectives or myself would dress as if we were homeless and had sat outside an apartment complex that he was known to frequent.
We commonly used attractive females so that guys are more willing to talk.
We followed him to local restaurants.
We had a person that was going to go meet with him and talk to him about tattoos and hopefully have lunch or coffee or something like that so that we could obtain a drink straw or a cup or a utensil or something like that that would have a high probability of DNA. We had some detectives that followed him from his house to a job site. He was working masonry works.
Some of the detectives met with the manager of the apartment complex and asked if we could use an empty apartment, one that faced where the wall was being constructed. We were able to watch his actions as he spent the day working.
They were just hoping, right? We're just waiting to get that DNA sample that's legal. He left for lunch one day. And when he left for lunch, he discarded his gloves under a tree. And he went over to his work truck and he had a Rockstar energy drink. And he took that drink and he was drinking it as he walked over to the truck. And when he got to the truck, he took that one last swallow that you take at the end of a canned beverage. And he set that down next to his truck.
So when he drove off, we went and picked up the can.
Once he abandons it, it's in a public place, it's a free-for-all.
This was the Holy Grail to us.
And he's coming to the lab right away. That's the first thing they want to know is, we need this tested. And so they would have brought it to us, we would have checked it into the evidence, run the test, called him back probably same day.
They were able to verify and confirm that the DNA on the can was the same that was on the hammer and the steering wheel of Ms. Dericott's car.
Anytime you have new technology, there's always a wonder. There's always a thing in the back of your mind is like, will this work? You know, will we be able to provide that? And so the first thing I thought, well, wow, it worked.
So who is the suspected killer they've identified?
His name is Rogelio Diaz Jr.
People described him as being someone who was kind of a wannabe gang member, but never really a gang member.
He had a girlfriend. He had kids.
A young man that is very small in stature. He claims to be 5 foot. His information from jail records has him listed at 4'11".
His father and a couple of his brothers, you know, had been deported back to Mexico, but he was actually born in the States, but his older siblings and parents were from Mexico.
We could never get any type of real history, work history from him. It appeared that he would work for temporary agencies that would give him temporary work.
At the time of the homicide, lived with another sister here in Puella. He'd gone from job to job, didn't really have a steady job, so just kind of bounced around, stayed with friends.
Police need to ensure that Rogelio doesn't flee and start planning his arrest.
Across the street from his home is a grocery store where he and the individual who was with him stopped, we assume, to either get breakfast or to get lunch for the day. When they stopped at that grocery store, West Valley City Police made a stop upon him. The Bloodline City Detectives then came in and took custody of him.
We let him know that he needed to come in and talk to us regarding a case.
He was 4.5 years after it happened before he was even arrested.
We were not in Twila City police cars, and none of our police stuff that we were wearing indicated Twila City at the time.
They didn't want him knowing that it was Twila. The element of surprise is still there because he didn't know at that moment when he was put in the police car that it concerned Ms. Derricott. He didn't know that until he got to the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office.
So did Diaz know Evelyn Derricott? And if so, why did he want to kill her?
He told us that on one occasion he had gone over and asked her if he could help her with her groceries out of her car, and she declined. So I believe when she looked at him and he looked at her, he panicked.
To look at him, he looked like he was, I guess you'd say, gang related, but they didn't say he was gang related.
In May 2016, the Tooele Police Department finally had Rogelio Diaz in custody for the ferocious murder of 69-year-old Evelyn Derricott in 2011.
This sweet lady had been murdered, viciously and brutally murdered, and her murderer is now in custody.
Detectives start interviewing Rogelio in the hope he will admit to the murder.
They had already coordinated with Salt Lake County that there would be an interview room that they could use. They were going to record the interview. There was a room for observation. We went in and they began the interview with him.
What's going on? Well, we can get to that, but just got to advise you of your rights, and if you want to talk to us, that's great.
You can stop at any point.
You can stop at any point.
He never freaked out. He never, at that point, got angry never showed his hand. He was very calm.
How long did you stay in Tooele? Was it a couple of years? Was it a couple months?
Just a little bit. I was working there.
And they began with asking him about his relationships in Tooele, if he had any reason to be in Tooele. And these are answers they already knew.
Did you ever do any type of installation, like home theater, music installation, stuff like that, people's houses, lighting?
I'm not good at electronics, man. I'd rather go to school for that. I ain't trying to get shot.
They asked him if he had ever done any work inside of anyone's home in Tooele, if he would have any reason to be in anyone's home in Tooele. And he said he didn't, and there was no reason he would have been in anyone's home in Tooele.
You never did any type of soliciting, door-to-door sales? No delivery?
No, nothing like that.
Nothing that would be taking you into people's houses that you don't know?
No.
We wanted to eliminate any alibis he might have for being in our house.
At that point, they pull out the photographs. They pull out the photograph of Miss Derricott.
You recognize that lady at all? You ever met her? You've never met her?
What's her name?
Evelyn.
They then begin to present him with the DNA evidence.
Is there any reason that your DNA would be in her home?
No, I don't know. Why would my DNA be in?
That's
what
what
we're
we're trying to
asking.
figure out.
They tell him that we have your DNA at the scene.
How would you guys... I never had no DNA taken from me. How would you guys say that you guys have my DNA?
We have your DNA.
You knew he was setting himself up when they had him, and he didn't know it.
So you guys have got my DNA in the home?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
My skin cells?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would say you guys are wrong because I was never in that home.
He had very much the attitude of you can't get me, you don't have anything on me type of attitude.
As I was watching him, he was in that room alone while the police were talking amongst themselves. And he just sat there stoic for a couple of minutes. And to me, it was defeat. They've got me. I'm not walking away from this. You could see it just from common human behavior.
With enough evidence to secure a conviction, detectives officially charged Diaz with the murder.
We charged him with murder. We charged him with aggravated burglary, being the fact that he entered someone's home and there was a death caused by him in that home.
From the interviews with Diaz and evidence collected at the crime scene, detectives pieced together the events of that fateful night.
I believe he had watched her. I believe he knew she lived alone. I believe he knew she was elderly, knew her comings and goings. I believed when he went into that home, he was there to burglarize the home.
I believe that he came in through that back sliding door, and Miss Derricott was downstairs. She heard a noise or a disturbance upstairs, came to see what it was, and confronted Rogelio on the stairs leading upstairs. And that's when the altercation occurred, and he used the hammer and hit her on the head.
Maybe he went in there with the intent to kill. I guess we'll never know. He's never said. But I suspect he went in there to burglarize the house.
Tooele police and the prosecution start preparing for trial, but Diaz is questioning the familial results.
I begin to prepare the case methodically, putting in place, researching, motions, those type of things which we may have to prepare for and may have to respond to. I believe the case was going to go to trial much sooner than it did. But the defense had its work to do. They had experts that they wanted to have look at things. So trial date after trial date was set.
On the eve of the trial, Diaz makes an announcement.
I get notice from his attorney on Friday, the trial starting Monday. that he's going to take the plea agreement. The plea agreement would be that he pleads guilty to aggravated burglary, which carries a lifetime sentence at the Utah State Prison, and that he would be willing to plead to manslaughter, which carries a 15-year sentence at the Utah State Prison.
I wanted him to go to trial, to have it done, but I didn't know if I could sit through a whole week.
When I got notice on Friday, I told his attorney, we're not canceling the trial. If he wants to plead, he's going to do it the day of trial. Because if he doesn't plead, we're doing the trial.
He admitted guilt, but he never offered really an explanation. He never looked at the family.
Over nearly 3 years, he sat in jail waiting to go to trial. To ultimately, the day of the trial, he pled to the charges.
I think when you're in those type of situations, I think one of the things you're looking for when you're a victim is someone just at least to say they're sorry. And he didn't give any of that. Nothing at all.
Rogelio Diaz is finally behind bars. But what kind of person is he?
I don't even know if I have words to describe him. My sister said lost, and I kind of agree. He's got to be lost.
I would describe him as a young man that has little man syndrome. He's very antagonistic and kind of aggressive. And I believe he probably developed those attributes for having, out of self-preservation, growing up in a rough area and being as small as he is.
The officers that worked tirelessly to solve the murder can finally close the case after almost a decade.
Was I personally satisfied? Absolutely. The hard work of the police department had paid off. The hard work of the crime lab had paid off. The hard work on behalf of this family had paid off. There was relief. It was over.
You like to say you can block things off, but you don't. You carry these type of things with you. I know officers do, prosecutors do. You carry this stuff. And it was just so much of a relief to feel like we had done it well, we had done it right, and we had done it the right way.
We felt relieved that it was over, that we were able to provide some closure to the Derricott family. Absolutely honored.
Would Rogelio have committed another crime in the future? Who knows? But forensics caught up with him before he had a chance.
They had no leads. There's nothing which would have led them to him.
We had been chasing a ghost. We had nothing to go on. We were taking shots in the dark, hoping that we would at some point stumble across our suspect that had the same match, the same DNA.
Without that familial DNA, I, as the prosecutor, do not believe this case would have been solved.
Anytime you bring new technology on, there's always you're not sure, will this work? But I think this case got caught early because of familial DNA testing. We potentially, saved some other victims in another family some trauma. And, it was kind of a precursor to what we're seeing right now with the genealogy cases.
Justice has been served. But for Evelyn Derricott's family, there is no justice. They will have to live with her loss for the rest of their lives.
In a way, people are like, well, you've got closure. I'm like, well, we do to a point, but it's just a new chapter that's been opened up. It's not really the end of the book. It won't do me any good to hold a grudge. To an extent, I probably could say that it's not something that rules every day of my life, but it's not going to be, it's always going to be there.
I guess, as much closure as you can have, but it's never going to go away.
When I hugged them, I told them, your closure can start to begin. Whether that ever fully happens, I don't know. But I believe, I hope and pray that they started to heal.